This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of this show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today I'm here with Brian Morin of Soteria Battery Innovation Group. Brian, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here.
So what was your background before joining Soteria Battery Innovation Group? What did you do before this?
Yeah, so I guess my training was in physics. So I have my PhD in materials physics from Ohio State University, and then 10 years at big companies, first DuPont, and then Milliken, a big textile company where I rose up to senior management, and then jumped ship in 2005 and became an entrepreneur, and I'm a 3-time entrepreneur. Soteria is my third startup.
Oh, great. So what led you to start work in the battery space?
Yeah, well, as my first startup was winding down, I got a call from a friend of mine, and he said, hey, so what comes next? And I said, well, it's 2010. It's probably easier to start a company than to find a job. So I'm looking at a bunch of things. And he said, have you ever thought about making battery separators for nanofibers? I was quickly Googling both words, but told him, hey, give me some time to look into it. And I read all the patents and papers and market studies on kind of both technologies. And within about 6 weeks had written the full business plan. And he and I sat down to dinner one night, and I said, look, I'll work for 6 months if you'll cover the expenses. And he slid a check across the table and said, let's do it. So that's when I jumped in. That was 2011. So here we are 9 years later and still working and loving the space. I moved from textiles, a kind of a flat industry, to batteries, which is growing by leaps and bounds. So it was a great move. Very grateful to Jim.
So what's your advice for people investing in the battery space? What do you tell them to do before they write that check?
Yeah, so, and especially when you're looking at private investments in the battery space, it's unique compared to a lot of other industries. And so I'll go through a couple of those different uniquenesses. The first one is the supply chain is very important. You've got very large companies, think automotive companies, electronics companies, so everything from Mercedes to Apple, that are going to be buying the batteries that go in their devices. And so they're going to want assurance of supply. They're going to want a broad supply chain. So they're going to want choices and competition. And so there's a lot of times a startup will say, well, hey, we're the only ones doing this. And that's a kiss of death. One company doing something is automatically going to relegate it to being a niche, because nobody's going to not sell, Mercedes is not going to not sell a car because they couldn't get a component out of a startup, right? So they're not going to put a startup into their supply chain. So that's the first one. The other one is, especially compared to software, the qualification times are relatively long. Outside of the automotive industry, you're looking at 12 to 24 months once you have a working prototype. In the automotive space, you're looking at least 3 years. The battery design runs on a 3-year cycle, and you have to be ready at the beginning of that cycle, not the end of it. So you're looking at the time it takes to get into the next cycle plus 3 years. And so the qualification times are long, and a lot of startups don't build that into their business plan. They show these hockey sticks that grow much faster than the industry is ever going to let them. The next one that I'll point out is a lot of startups will say, hey, we're going straight to the automotive space. It's the big fat part of the market. And the truth is there's not a single material or component being used in automotive that wasn't first validated in some other market space. And so a startup has to choose a landing strip market where they can get field validation other than automotive. And then all of this adds to the amount of money needed to take a technology from kind of the bench scale, university scale to full production and market penetration is just immense. It's not 5, 10, 20, $50 million. It's more like many hundreds or even $1 billion to commercialize a new technology.
Well, great. So let's talk about the state of investing in this sector. How is the industry evolving, and what's the growth rate of it? What companies are engaged with it?
Yeah, so the good news is the market opportunity is just immense. So the industry is growing very quickly, averaging a 20 to 22% annual growth rate. That's accelerating as electric vehicles are coming into the market faster and faster and being accepted by the consumers. And so the other thing is there's a lot of companies, especially big companies, are trying to find a way to get into the industry. And so the opportunity for partnership with big companies is very, very strong. And basically, every company that has a material or device is trying to find a way to make that material device or device useful in electric vehicles. And if somebody has a way of doing that, it becomes a real opportunity. Because of the high growth, the economies of scale are coming on, so prices are dropping. And that's a trend that will continue. The price per kilowatt hour of a lithium-ion battery in 2011, when I started, was about $1,000 a kilowatt hour. And today it's about $150 a kilowatt hour. So that's a giant drop. It's going to continue. I don't think we'll get another factor of 7 in the next decade. But we'll certainly get a factor of 2. And so the other thing is, as the prices come down, there's more and more applications that now become commercially viable. And so things like air taxis, short haul aircraft, hybrid and electric boats all become viable because the price of the battery has gone down, which means the cost of building those applications using electricity as the power source rather than jet fuel or gas as the power source, it's actually lower using electricity. And what it does is, especially for aircraft, things like safety and weight become really important. And so they'll, even as prices for normal batteries are coming down, they'll pay a premium for safety and weight, which has opened up even more applications. So the growth rate is going to continue. Today, the growth rate is limited by supply. So cars are not being sold because they can't get batteries. And I hope that helps you understand that if they can't get batteries from big companies like LG and Samsung, they're certainly not going to stick a startup in their supply chain. And then if you look, there's hundreds, maybe 1,000 companies in the market in various ways, and everybody else is trying to get in. So it's very dynamic market. A lot of things are changing, high growth, great place to be innovating.
So let's talk about the challenges in this space. You mentioned the long design-in cycles and the cost of scaling, but what are the other challenges, such as regulatory and technology? What do you find going on there that startups have to overcome?
Yeah, so regulatory plays a role, but before you get to regulatory, you've got just a very conservative market because, anytime, so if you're in the military and you put a lot of energy in a small package and then put the ignition source inside the package with that, you call that a grenade, right? Well, we call that a battery because you got the ignition source inside the battery, right? The electrical energy will light it on fire. This industry is very conservative about changing anything because of the risk of safety and the immense cost of safety. So when Samsung had their cell phone issue in 2017, it cost them $18 billion in lost revenue. So that recall and taking the phone off the market was very expensive, very debilitating for the brand, right? That's just lost revenue. It's not counting the brand equity that was lost. And so everybody's very conscious of safety. So it's very conservative. I mentioned the long time scales. Those are important. And there's a certain amount of naivety among the investors and the bench scientists to the timescales and the money that's required to scale something new. The other thing is there's some naivety around the ability, once you get maybe 100 cycles out of a new technology, that it's just a little bit of refinement before I can get from 100 cycles to 1,000 cycles. That's actually a major piece of work that can take years. So having something on the bench that'll do something great but only work for 100 cycles is really going to relegate it to very niche applications like drones and things like that, where you can swap out the batteries fairly frequently. And then the last thing is, in order to scale a technology, there's a large number of competencies required: material competencies, processing competencies, application development, cell engineering. And it's hard to put all of that into one small company. So that's a real challenge that a lot of people overlook. On the other hand, the good side, this market's going to be many hundreds of billions of dollars. It's a large fraction of $100 billion now. And there's decades of this kind of 20 to 25% growth sitting in front of us that we can identify already. And so you think about things like air taxis. 10 years from now, air taxis are going to be buzzing over San Francisco and Manhattan like a swarm of bumblebees. And they're going to be automated. The control is going to be automated. They're all going to be run on batteries. and it's going to cost you $10 to get from Manhattan to LaGuardia in an air taxi. That's a lot of batteries, right? So there's a big opportunity there. Short haul jets are already being designed also. So jets that go 300-500 miles using batteries and pure electricity as the fuel source. The cost of operation comes down by about 80% for an electric jet versus a jet fuel jet. But it's going to take probably 10 or 15 years before those come to fruition. But there's an awful lot of batteries that are required to get a jet 200 or 300 miles.
So how does Soteria Battery Innovation Group fit into this landscape? What role is it taking and where does it fit in?
Yeah, so we're playing kind of two roles. So the first is we've got a base technology that can improve the safety and lower the weight of batteries while reducing the cost. And so we're at the point now where we're putting the batteries into the field in commercial applications, getting field validation data. And we're doing this in a way that gives the entire industry access. So we formed a consortium of companies that we're giving access to the technology as an open innovation platform. So we've got 54 companies in this open consortium now. It grows every month. And these companies like Mercedes-Benz, DuPont, Bosch, Motorola, DuPont, and Applied Materials, and then many others, right? And many more that will be joining over the next months and next years. Those companies are the ones that are going to commercialize this technology. Each of them brings a core competency that we don't have and that the other companies don't have. So the beauty of this business model is that nobody has to do everything and that the end users get a supply chain that they can tolerate and honestly embrace, right? Because they have good competitors, companies that are hundreds of years old with global distribution, and a couple of them competing with each other for the business. So then that's kind of phase one, is for us to get this technology out there. And then once we've established this consortium and say we get in 2 years, we've gotten 54 members. Let's say 2 or 3 years from now, we're up over 200, maybe 300 members. And it's the who's who of the battery industry. At that point, we go to the universities, the national labs, the startups, and even big companies, and we cherry pick technologies that are applicable for the whole space. And because we've got kind of the supply chain already cooperating with each other, we take those technologies in, we do the hard work of testing and maturing those technologies, building a business case around them, and then we license them to the industry through our consortium. What I found in talking to the end users and the battery companies, they want a broad supply chain. They don't mind if their competitors have access to base technology. So that's what we want. We want to be the app store for lithium-ion battery technology for the foreseeable future, and let everything kind of pass through us and get broad access so that everybody gets access and can enjoy the benefits.
Well, that sounds great. Well, in the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I guess the thing I'd like to end with is just that we're in a unique place in time where batteries have come to fruition. The environment is demanding things to improve, and the performance of devices, especially electric vehicles made with batteries, are better than any other way. So people buy electric vehicles not because they're green or they're cheap, but because they're just better. They're faster, they're cooler, they're quieter, they're easier to automate. And so we're at a kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to get involved in the space. This space is changing and growing, and it's going to continue for a decade or so, but it's a great place to take a few dollars and spread them out and place some bets, because some of those bets are certainly going to come to fruition.
Well, that's great. Well, how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
The best thing is email. It's going to be on the page where this podcast is. And so shoot me an email. I'll respond to every one of them and look forward to talking to everybody.
Great. We'll add those to the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Halti Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early-stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for the basis of investment decisions.